This is a video on knitting fingered or fingerless gloves. It's not the easiest project I've ever done, and I've made a few mistakes. As you can see, the first pair I knitted, I was away with the fairies, so did the cuffs different lengths. The second pair I twisted the thumb, and these are the third pair I've knitted. From mine, when I knitted it, came out the fingers seemed far too long for me, and the cuff. So in the pattern, I've actually reduced the number of rows for the fingers and the cuff. Obviously, have a go and do one and see how it comes out, and then you can decide whether you need to add any extra or take any rows away. I've set my machine for 1x1 rib. I'm going to take the carriage along to just centre and line up all the needles. I apologise if I'm going to knock the video camera, but it's in the way of me, and I really could do with an independent person to do my filming for me, but such is life. And to cast on, I'm going to add this magnetic clip that I got from a stationery store onto the yarn tail. Take the ribber comb, centre it, and then push it up. And I don't think you can see, I'm pushing up on the end there. Bring it up slightly, remove the wire only as far as the edge of the knitting. Push the comb up and push the wire back in. Never ever take the wire completely out of the ribber comb if you can manage. Makes life so much easier. I'm not adding any weights yet. I'm just going to do the first 3 rows of circular knitting. Your machine will show you how to do those rows. I usually knit 3, others knit 2. It's entirely your own choice. And I always check that my ribber comb is dropping correctly. Sometimes it gets caught. Now I set the carriages for knitting the rib, which I do on tension 3, and I hang my weights. I'm only doing 2 big ones for this size amount of needles. Hang it on the outside edge. Set row counter to 0 and knit 16 rows of rib, checking for the first few rows that the comb drops down. That's 16 rows of rib. We're now going to transfer to the main bed. I prefer to lift all the needles on the ribber up, as it makes it a little bit easier, I think, to transfer, because it just saves you that little bit of time. And then just transfer all the needles to the main bed. As I mentioned before, we've only actually got 29 stitches on this side, because that's the nature of 1x1 rib. So I take my transfer tool, I'm using a triple transfer tool here, and move the last 3 stitches over to 30 and pick up the heel of the stitch and place it on the empty needle. Hang claw weights on the knitting. I use 3, one either side and one in the middle. And we're now going to knit, if I remember quickly, 26 rows, because this is for the gap between your wrist and your thumb. Change to main bed sinker plate, 0 the row counter and set tension to main tension. And knit 26 rows in stockinette. It's 26 rows knitted. And to move my claw weights up, now going to knit the thumb. And for this, you set the machine to hold. Always do that first because I always forget. And I'm going to try and move this so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to bring out 11 needles. 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. And I'm going to E-wrap those needles. So that's 11 needles E-wrapped. What I actually want is another 11 that I've already knitted. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. And then I'm going to bring the rest of the needles to hold. So I've got 22 stitches, including the 11 I've just cast on, in working position. I advise you to close the latches on the E-wrapped needles. And this is easier with a piece of paper than trying to do it, just to make it just a little bit easier to knit, because you've got to push these back. Because as you are no doubt aware, if you've got a hold mechanism on, you can't knit needles that are pulled completely out. So we're now we've got 22 needles now in working position. I'm going to engage my weaving brushes because that's helpful for the first few rows where you've E-wrapped. I've knitted across the first row, and I just like to wrap the first needle in hold just for that one row. That's 2 rows. That's 4 rows, and I think I've knitted enough now to hang a claw weight on these E-wrap stitches. Move this weight up fairly regularly. And now knit for how many rows was it for the thumb? 14 rows. I do apologise. For 14 rows. I've knitted 14 rows for the thumb. Now, that's for fingerless gloves. And I'm now going to cast off behind the gate pegs. If I was doing a fingered glove, I would have knitted 23 rows here, and then transferred every other stitch, tightened the tension, knitted a row, and then thread the yarn through the stitches to pull it up and secure it to make a finger top. But I'm just going to cast off behind the gate pegs. Right, I've cast off behind the gate pegs. So I take it off and hold it like that. That's how it came off. This is the cast off edge. You take this side and you fold it in so that the two right sides are together. Cast off edge is still at the top. Then tilt it towards you, turn it up until you have those E-wrap stitches that you put on. That's the cast on edge. And then you pick up 11 stitches to bring you back to the 30 that side. Now when you pick up, don't pick up the first row, go down a row. This is to make sure you don't get a purl ridge. On the right side. Just making sure I am going through there. We've picked up those 11 stitches. Bring them all forward and close the latches again just to make it easier for it to knit off on those. Cancel hold, row counter to 0, rethread the yarn, and we're going to knit 16 rows. Make sure you've cancelled hold. Now I like to weave these yarn ends in, otherwise there's too many of them. So just weave over and under 4 stitches, knit back across, pull them out again, and weave over and under. And then snip that piece of yarn and carry on knitting for the 16 rows. We're now going to knit the little finger. So I want you to pull the centre 7 needles into hold. And make sure you put hold on now or else it won't work. Centre 7 needles. And then all the other needles on the opposite side of the carriage, bring those to hold. So they're all in hold. You're now going to knit these stitches off on waste yarn. I like to do about 8 rows. Others do less, but I'm too cowardly. Snip the yarn. Remove those claw weights. And move the carriage across without yarn, and it will drop those stitches. It won't drop anything else because you've got it in hold. Push those stitches back out of the way. Now I'm going to do the same on the opposite side. So leaving the centre 14 stitches in hold, push needle 8 to 30 back to upper working position, and take those off on waste yarn. Oh, wrong yarn. Cut the yarn. Move the claw weights and take those stitches off and put those needles back. You're now left with those 14 centre stitches. Cancel hold and pick up the heel of the stitch from the stitch on waste yarn and place it on the needle bed, and this will give you now 16 stitches. Now going to knit 10 rows. Always remembering to zero your row counter. Again, I'm going to just weave in these ends. And then carry on until you've got 16 rows. As with the thumb, because this is fingerless, I'm going to cast off these stitches. Instructions for doing the finger glove I've already given you, and I think they're written in the pattern as well on how to do it if you want fingered gloves. Cut the yarn and leave a longish bit because I'm going to use that to sew the seam up. And remove stitches off the gate peg. Claw weight hanging there that I don't want. You're now going to pick up, making sure that the wrong side is facing you. So you can see that that's the thumb. And that's the first finger. With the wrong side facing, pick up these stitches that are on waste yarn. But I'm going to cross the first one over onto left one and then put the next stitch onto the second needle, because we're going to cross over the other side once we've hung these. So go ahead and hang all the stitches back onto the needles. Which I think is 24 stitches, but I could be wrong. On the other side, again, first stitch that you pick up, you put on right one, and then pick up the rest as you've crossed the stitches, just to make a slightly stronger join. I misled you. You should now have 46 stitches, 23 stitches either side of 0. Now that you've picked all those up, now going to knit 6 rows. This is now the third finger, which is very similar to doing the first finger. We want the centre 14 needles in hold, so remember to put hold on now, and all the needles opposite side of the carriage to hold. And we're going to take this first set of stitches off on waste yarn. Exactly the same as we did for the other finger. Take the carriage across, push those needles back, keeping the centre 14 in hold. Push the other needles back to upper working position and take those off on waste yarn. And cut the yarn and take those stitches off, push those needles back. Then pick up the heel of the stitch from the first stitch that's on waste yarn, pick it up so you've got 16. Shows ambidextrous. Now going to knit 10 rows as we did for the other. So cancel hold. Almost forgot to weave that in. That's 4 rows. And now knit the other 6. And do the same as we've done on the others, cast off or knit more rows for the fingered gloves. So just to recap, we've got a thumb, a little finger, and this is the third finger. So we're now going to do the middle finger. So you need to pick up from either side of this waste yarn 8 stitches. But as before, you're going to pick the first stitch you pick up onto left 1, and then put the rest of the 8 from 2 to 9. Sorry, 2 to 9, 2 to 8, can't count. Then from the other side, you're going to pick up the first stitch and put it on right 1, so you've crossed over the stitches, and then put the rest, the other 7 stitches, on the needles, so that you are left with 8 stitches still on waste yarn. As you can see, we've still got stitches on either side that we're not picking up. As before, I'm going to pick up the heel of the stitch from the other, what's left on waste yarn, and pick that up, put it on the end, and that gives us 18 stitches, if I can count correctly, and then knit 10 rows. If you ever do change the number of rows you're doing, don't forget to write it down and do the same on each finger. So 10 rows. Or more rows if you're doing the fingers, and then again take this off as you would normally do. For fingerless, I'm going to cast off behind the gate pegs. We're now on the homeward stretch. I'm going to pick up the remaining 8 stitches, but we're going to leave right 1 and left 1 empty. I'm going to do these on needles 2 to 9. You'll see why in a minute. I've managed to make a mistake somewhere, so I've actually got 9 stitches on this side and 8 on this side, but don't let them worry you, the theory's still the same. So now, for those 2 centre needles, you need to pick up a stitch. Let's see if you can see this. Pick up a stitch from the base of the middle finger, that side, and then I'm going to pick up one from the base of this side. I'm going to bring the needles forward just to make it a little easier to knit. And we're going to knit 10 rows as before. And as before, I'm going to cast those stitches off. And as you can see, I've taken it off the machine, and we do have the correct number of fingers. So there's the thumb, the first finger, third ring finger and little finger. Sometimes when I haven't been paying attention, we've ended up with 6 fingers, which might suit some, and I've ended up with 3 fingers, which, as I say, you need to concentrate. All you need to do now is, if you remove all the waste yarn, and as I said, I changed this pattern slightly so that there are it's a much shorter cuff. You might prefer a longer cuff. You might want longer fingers, but for me, because I think I must have short fingers, that will do me, keeps my fingers free, but not too short. So all you need to do now is a mattress stitch or Bickford seam, the fingers and the sides together, and there you have one glove. Now, when you come to do the second glove, either do one less or one more row on the rib so that the carriage ends over this side, and you will E-wrap stitches on this side of the knitting so that the thumb is obviously pointing in the opposite direction. I hope that's clear. Thank you.